Okay, we're gonna go sit up here.
And he's making a run for it.
All right, for the third presentation today, please give your attention to Mr. Cory.
A former marijuana grower was asked, would you like to see the government legalize marijuana here in DC? He responded, I know I wouldn't like to see it legalized. The government would control and regulate the product, and that could potentially hurt the industry. When government and high-level drug dealers agree on drug policy, it leads one to question, what is the purpose of prohibition? And more specifically, why exactly is cannabis a prohibited drug? Cannabis sativa L, more commonly known as marijuana, covers cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and hemp. Indica marijuana provides a body plant, which can help deal with physical pain. The sativa plants provide a mental or uplifting high, while also energizing the user and even combating depression. They have their differences, yet they are both what is used medically and or recreationally. This leads to two main categories, marijuana and hemp. The main difference between the two, besides how they look and how they are grown, is the concentration of the chemical delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC for short, which is the chemical that gives marijuana users a high, and the ratio of THC to cannabidiol, another chemical in marijuana. The concentration in hemp of THC, well below 1%, is not enough to get high from. However, the THC concentration ranges from 3% to 25% in the cannabis sativa and cannabis indica plants. Marijuana is composed of many chemicals. However, the most important chemicals are cannabinoids. These different cannabinoids, such as cannabidiol, cannabinol, and THC, all perform different tasks, but together, they produce the medical effects that research has proven marijuana has. The war which continues to take place against marijuana began in the early 1900s with the greediness of a man called Andrew Mellon, who was Treasury Secretary of the United States between 1921 and 1932. Andrew Mellon founded an oil company with his brother, Richard Mellon, in 1901 called Gulf Oil. In the 1920s and 30s, the DuPont Chemical Company was making major advancements with oil. They were able to develop the process for chemically treating paper pulp from trees, gasoline additives, cellophane, and nylon. Andrew Mellon had heavy investments in DuPont, which largely benefited him because of his investments in oil, which is what DuPont mainly focused on using. Conveniently, Andrew Mellon appointed his nephew-in-law, Harry J. Anslinger, to be the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in 1930. After he was appointed, Anslinger abused his power and began a war on marijuana and hemp, which was fueled by people's racism during that time. Some of Anslinger's most popular quotes are, "You smoke a joint and you're likely to kill your brother," and "Reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men." He began an attack on marijuana and marijuana users based on invalid reasons, which he knew would work because of the public's fear. However, Anslinger wasn't the only one wrongly depicting marijuana smokers. With the help of William Randolph Hearst, who owned a massive chain of newspapers, Anslinger was able to scare people of the supposed dangers of marijuana. Hearst was attacked by Pancho Villa and his rebels. Villa took 800,000 acres of forestry, which were owned by the Hearst Corporation. Pancho Villa and his followers were known to sing La Cucaracha, a famous Spanish song, which included the word marijuana. He took the slang word from the song and used the new terminology as propaganda against Hispanics, Negroes, and him, because people were unaware of what it was. Although marijuana is a common term now, it was not a word that was used in the 1930s or prior to that. Instead, people called it hemp, or cannabis hemp. So, when all the newspaper articles wrongly depicting marijuana were written, the majority of the public did not know that the newspapers were referring to something that was and had been grown and used in America and all over the world. The Hearst Corporation, which was owned by William Hearst, used DuPont's street pulp treatment process to create paper for the multiple newspaper chains owned by the corporation, meaning he could get paper extremely cheap. Furthermore, Hearst made large investments in the timber industry in order to support his newspaper chains. Hemp just happened to be a much more efficient, environmentally safe way of producing paper, which would lead to Hearst losing money. Thus, he attempted to terrify people of marijuana's supposed dangers, even though he had no proof. One of his newspaper chains stated, "Users of marijuana become stimulated as they inhale the drug and are likely to do anything. Most crimes of violence in this section, especially in county districts, are laid to users of that drug." The claim this newspapers made had absolutely no validity, but the public believed it. This all led to the introduction of Anslinger's plan, which would eventually be called the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. He knew the government had no constitutional right to simply outlaw marijuana, so he turned to taxation as a way to regulate the product. Anslinger's proposal to Congress included multiple cases of violent crimes committed while under the influence of marijuana. He told Congress, "Here's a gang of 7 young men, all 7 of them, young men under 21 years of age. They terrorized Ohio for more than 2 months, and they were responsible for 38 stick-ups. They all boast they did those crimes while under the influence of marijuana." Anslinger continued presenting horrific crimes that were supposedly done under the influence of marijuana in order to try to scare Congress into action. The American Medical Association was not even made aware of the bill until 2 days before the hearing. One who opposed Anslinger, Dr. William C. Woodward of the Legislative Council of the American Medical Association, was sent to testify at the hearing. He saw the flaw in Anslinger's argument. Dr. Woodward told Congress, "It has surprised me, however, that the facts on which these statements have been based have not been brought before this committee by competent primary evidence. We are referred to newspaper publications concerning the prevalence of marijuana addiction." Dr. Woodward showed the flaw in Anslinger's argument by pointing to the different bureau departments that had not been asked of the accusations Anslinger was making regarding marijuana. However, he was ignored, and the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 passed, thus commencing a second era of uncalled-for prohibition, shortly after the failed prohibition of alcohol. Since Anslinger was the sole overseer over who got the tax stamps, he was able to ensure that no tax stamps were given out, essentially making all forms of cannabis illegal. Many people would agree that alcohol and tobacco cause a variety of illnesses, ranging from cirrhosis to lung cancer. However, since these drugs are legal, they are not something that society as a whole generally questions if they should be made illegal. Until recently, cannabis prohibition was accepted by a majority of people. When more scientific research began, researchers began to see the medical effects of marijuana, which were known even before it was made illegal, but were hidden by government lies. In fact, cannabis was already used as medicine prior to the 1930s. From 1850 to 1937, cannabis has been recorded as being the prime medicine for more than 100 different types of illnesses or diseases in the U.S. pharmacopoeia. Some people continue to believe cannabis should be illegal altogether. Some believe it should be legal only as a medicine, while others believe it should be legal like alcohol or tobacco. Those who believe it should be legalized do not believe everybody should smoke, simply that everybody should have the right to. Some states have decriminalized marijuana. This means that it remains illegal, but it is not a law enforcement priority. Legalization means people can set up shops to sell marijuana, the government can tax it, people can use it legally, and there can be commercial hemp farms. Decriminalization is pointless because the government continues to mix out on taxation money. Considering that marijuana is less addictive than alcohol, tobacco, pharmaceutical painkillers, such as hydrocodone or oxycontin, and even coffee or sugar, is it really the killer weed Anslinger and Hearst warned everybody of? The policies prohibiting marijuana and hemp have proven to have failed. Furthermore, the horrific effects of tobacco, alcohol, and legal drugs provide a drastic comparison that shows how harmful cannabis is not. More importantly, cannabis is not only not harmful, it is actually beneficial to the human body because of its cannabinoids. Senator Larry Campbell, mayor of Vancouver between 2002 to 2005, stated, "If prohibition worked, okay, if you could just wave a magic wand and say this has gone away, I'd be all over it. But the fact of the matter is that prohibition has never worked. Prohibition, a failed concept that continues to be repeated, is often mixed with the word drug control. However, there is nothing that is actually being controlled about drugs, more specifically, marijuana. The government has no power over how marijuana is grown, the age limit required to purchase it, the potency, or even the purity of the substance. Instead, they allow the underground market and dealers to determine all those things. Nobody knows what harmful chemicals are used during growing operations, and to make sure the underground market thrives, the government allows them to keep all the profits, while it continues to fuel the drug war with more government spending. So when officials speak of controlled, illegal drugs, they are referring to drugs that they have no power over. Instead, they're attempting to control people and what they do in private. This has proven to be an unfeasible task in the last 100 years, beginning with alcohol prohibition. The government may be able to persuade a part of the population to do what they're told without providing valid reasons, but history and modern times have proven that there will always be those who refuse to follow blindly, and that is why prohibition fails. Additionally, attempting to stop the supply of a wanted good, as prohibition does, simply raises the value of that good. If the amount available is decreased, then the value will naturally increase, and as laws get stricter and punishments get tougher, the more problems and violence, along with an increase in price, there will arise from the underground market. An increase in price merely leads to an increase in profit, thus providing more incentive to become a part of the underground market as a grower or a dealer. A recent example of the failure of prohibition, the alcohol prohibition, also known as the Noble Experiment, began as an attempt to reduce crime and corruption, solve social problems, improve health and hygiene in America, and reduce the tax burden created by prisons. Alcohol prohibition failed miserably. Since there was no regulated market, alcohol was made from whatever was possible. This led to a massive increase in alcohol poisoning from moonshine and other forms of alcohol that were made at the time. Making alcohol illegal created a vast emptiness in a thriving market, which people such as Al Capone took advantage of by establishing organized crime, which centered on the illegal making and distribution of alcohol, because of the profits that could be made from entering the market. Alcohol prohibition didn't work because people refused to follow the law blindly and were willing to break it. By 1925, there were over 100,000 speakeasies in New York alone. Clearly, the large amount of speakeasies after a few short years of alcohol prohibition demonstrates the market that continued to exist, although it was illegal. Corruption was rampant during this time, as government officials were easily coerced for criminals with large sums of money used as incentives. Also, some alcohol drinkers turned to other illegal drugs, as they were exposed to them through the underground market. If the government considers tobacco and alcohol good enough to allow them to remain legal, then that must mean they're not as bad for you, at least not as bad as marijuana supposedly is. Since the assumed purpose of making some drugs illegal is to protect members of society. Moreover, the drugs that the Federal Drug Administration approves should also not be anywhere near as dangerous as marijuana. Considering that smoking causes cancer, heart disease, stroke, and lung disease, including emphysema, bronchitis, and chronic airway obstruction, and that it kills nearly 6 million people a year, of whom more than 5 million are users and ex-users, and more than 600,000 are non-smokers exposed to secondhand smoke, it makes one wonder, could the government possibly be wrong in the drug war? Alcohol doesn't kill nearly as many people. Nonetheless, there are approximately 80,000 deaths attributable to excessive alcohol consumption in the United States each year. The long-term effects of heavy alcohol use include neurological, cardiovascular, psychiatric, social, and liver problems, with cirrhosis being among the 15 leading causes of all deaths in the United States. These figures don't even begin to address other issues related to alcohol, such as domestic violence or drunk driving. Alcohol, and especially tobacco, result in the hundreds of thousands of annual deaths of people, some who don't even smoke or drink. Dr. Norm Sanford, the Seattle Chief of Police between 1994 and 2000, stated in an interview, "From beat cop to police chief, I saw ample evidence of the harm caused by alcohol and the absence of evidence caused by marijuana use, and I mean the complete absence. I cannot recall a single case in which marijuana contributed to domestic violence, crimes of theft, and the like." While in the same documentary, David Malcolm Levine of the Vancouver Drug War History School states, "There's no cases of marijuana-only smokers getting brown lung syndrome. There's no cases of marijuana-only smokers getting emphysema. Strange for a plant that's so dangerous. How come none of that?" Clearly, the current drug laws are not supporting the people's best interests. Instead, they're supporting the interests of alcohol and tobacco companies. With a staggering amount of deaths directly attributable to marijuana each year, none at all. The lack of evidence for the continuation of prohibiting marijuana is blinding. With a combined market capitalization of $205 billion, the top 4 alcohol companies stand to lose billions of dollars to cannabis. The top 3 tobacco companies, which profited over $13 billion in 2012 alone, also stand to lose a large amount of profit if cannabis is legalized. All for one simple reason: cannabis does not kill people, while alcohol and tobacco kill hundreds of thousands of people in the United States alone per year. If cannabis is legalized, it will provide a much safer option for people. Dr. Lester Greenspoon, professor emeritus of psychiatry at Harvard Medical States, said, "Much to my astonishment, here I was, trained in science and medicine, and had to discover that I had been brainwashed just like every other American." In regards to prohibition, he says, "It astonishes me that we can't get around this prohibition. It's like something is sacred about it. You can't question it. You can't bring any factual data to it. This is because when factual data is brought, it becomes quite clear that the government has been wrong all along. It is not marijuana which is treacherous to people. It is alcohol and tobacco. This does not mean that alcohol and tobacco should be made illegal. It does, however, mean that cannabis should be legalized. Most people are aware of the dangers of tobacco and alcohol, but there's one group of companies that is attempting to keep the adverse side effects of their products hidden. In a society where people constantly fear for what may be wrong with them, pharmaceutical companies are able to thrive by providing a different pill for every individual problem. If a drug is able to do what it is supposed to do, without killing too many people during clinical trials, then the FDA approves it, and although prescriptions tell consumers of many of the side effects, people do not actually take the hazardous side effects seriously, since the effects are so common. People assume none of the side effects will actually affect them, especially since not only the FDA, but their doctors are approving the prescription drug. Pharmaceutical companies can't compete with the plant. It's not something they can patent, which is how they make money from drugs that they offer. The top 10 pharmaceutical companies profited almost $50 billion in 2012. If cannabis is offered as an alternative, safer medicine, and people are made aware of its healing properties, people will stop taking harmful drugs pharmaceutical companies offer. Dr. Barbara Starfield documents in an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association in July 26, 2000, that there are over 106,000 deaths per year from adverse effects of FDA-approved medications. Many of these deaths are due to the fact that when clinical research is done, companies do not test how the combination of different prescription drugs will affect the body over time. The tremendous amount of deaths hasn't received anywhere near as much attention as they should have. Instead, the government insists on keeping marijuana as a Schedule I drug, supposedly having no known medical benefits. The hypocrisy of the United States government is ridiculous, showing that they certainly do not care about the people's best interests. However, it isn't merely what marijuana doesn't do, there's also what it does do. Dr. Dustin Sulak, who has a medical clinic in Maine, states, "We treat over 1,000 patients with a huge diversity of diseases and symptoms. In one day I might see cancer, Crohn's disease, epilepsy, chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, insomnia, Tourette syndrome, and eczema, just to name a few. All of these conditions have different causes, different physiologic states, and vastly different symptoms. The patients are old and young. Yet despite their differences, almost all of my patients would agree on one point: cannabis helps their condition." He goes on to say, "How can one herb help so many different conditions? How can it provide both palliative and curative actions? How can it be so safe while offering such powerful effects?" The search to answer these questions had led scientists to the discovery of a previously unknown physiologic system, a central component of the health and healing of every human and almost every animal, the endocannabinoid system. Endocannabinoids and the receptors are found everywhere in the body. While describing the endocannabinoid system, Dr. Robert Melanie, PhD, ex-chairman of the biology department of the University of Colorado, said, "We have cannabinoid receptors, and those cannabinoid receptors literally help to maintain and organize all of our body systems. So our immune system, digestive system, cardiovascular system, skeletal systems, muscles, everything in our body. All of these major organized entities are homeostatically maintained by our endocannabinoid system through our receptors. Those receptors are in all of those body systems. In each tissue, the cannabinoid system performs different tasks, but the goal is always the same: homeostasis. Homeostasis maintains a stable internal environment in the body despite changes that occur in the external environment." Dr. Jeffrey Hergenrather, addiction medicine specialist, describes cannabinoids' effects on cancer by saying, "There's a wealth of laboratory evidence that these anti-tumor properties kill cancer cells in a variety of ways. There are multiple mechanisms of action identified by which cannabis kills cancer cells, and they're divided into various categories. And among these are anti-proliferative effects. Normally, that's one of the hallmarks of a cancer cell, is that it just keeps reproducing. So if you stop the reproduction, that's an anti-proliferative effect. There's an anti-angiogenic effect, and this means that the cannabinoids will stop the tumor from being able to elaborate or grow new blood vessels to support the growth of the tumor. There are anti-metastatic effects, and that is simply enough to mean that the cannabinoids block the ability of the cancer cells to spread into other tissues. And there's another effect that has a wild name: apoptotic effect. Apoptosis refers to the ability of cannabinoids to speed the death of the abnormal cells, and that's something that is especially important in cancer because you're able to hasten the death of this cell without disturbing normal cells around it. Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, medical director of Canna Centers, describes cannabis' effect in the body by stating in an interview, "It has strong anti-inflammatory properties. Not only does it help suppress inflammation, but there was a study that showed that it also helps the body to not make the chemical that causes inflammation. So, it has somewhat of a preventive role. Cannabidiol has also been found to have anticonvulsive properties, and that it can reduce the seizure threshold for a number of patients. I've had my own patients who have said that once they started using cannabidiol-rich strains, they have found that they have had less episodes of the seizures. So cannabis' cannabinoids not only help common injuries and the pain related to those injuries from inflammation, but they can also offer hope to patients with seizures. This information gathered from thousands of scientific studies led Dr. Sulak to ask himself, can an individual enhance his or her cannabinoid system by taking supplemental cannabis? Beyond treating symptoms, beyond curing disease, can cannabis help us prevent disease and promote health by stimulating an ancient system that is hardwired into all of us? In 1902, Thomas Edison said, "There were never so many able, active minds at work on the problems of disease as now, and all the discoveries are trending toward the simple truth that you can improve on nature." Could this apply to cannabis? The research showing cannabis is beneficial with Alzheimer's disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, chronic pain, diabetes mellitus, dystonia, fibromyalgia, gastrointestinal disorders, gliomas or cancer, hepatitis C, HIV, Huntington's disease, hypertension, incontinence, MRSA, multiple sclerosis, osteoporosis, pruritus, rheumatoid arthritis, sleep apnea, and Tourette syndrome indicate the answer to be yes. Animal studies have shown that cannabinoids the least progression and, in fact, inhibit neurodegeneration in mouse models of ALS, Parkinson's, and MS. Investigators at Ireland's Trinity College Institute of Neuroscience wrote in the September 2012 issue of the British Journal of Pharmacology, "Cannabinoids offer a multifaceted approach for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease by providing neuroprotection and reducing neuroinflammation, while simultaneously supporting the brain's intrinsic repair mechanisms by augmenting neurotrophin expression and enhancing neurogenesis." Manipulation of the cannabinoids pathway offers a pharmacological approach for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease that may be efficacious than current treatment regimens. Gliomas, or tumors in the brain, are a form of cancer, which typically result in the patient's death a mere 1 to 2 years after diagnosis. In 2000, investigators at Madrid's Complutense University School of Biology concluded that the administration of THC and a synthetic cannabinoid induced a considerable regression of malignant gliomas in animals. In order to try to explain how cannabis is able to help for such a vast number of diseases, Dr. Malamud says, "We're always getting rid of our cells, replacing them with new cells. This flow through all of the cells, everything is coordinated, so that us as flow-dependent structures are ultimately able to interface with our changing environment. We are hypervariable, and it turns out, from my understanding and knowledge, that the big thing that allowed that to happen is our endocannabinoid system. It's quite miraculous, because we now know that, as we know for pretty much thousands of years, is that marijuana plant has the capacity to touch basically our biochemical soul, the thing that's regulating everything in us. Cannabis' medicinal properties were well known to the medical systems of ancient India, China, and Tibet, and are becoming increasingly well known by Western society. Although more human-based research must be done in order to find the extent of marijuana's effectiveness with different diseases, and the massive base that is already provided leaves one questioning why more research isn't being done, and why it still remains listed as a Schedule I drug, supposedly having no known medical value. It isn't simply the medicinal benefits of marijuana that make it worth growing, it's also the endless possibilities for hemp. In 1960, USDA Bulletin number 404 reported that 1 acre of cannabis hemp, an annual rotation over a 20-year period, would produce as much pulp for paper as 4.1 acres of trees being cut down over the same 20-year period. This process would not only help save millions of trees, but it would use as little as 1/7 to 1/4 as much polluting sulfur-based chemicals to break down the linen that binds the fibers of the pulp, or even none at all using soda ash. Thus, hemp provides 4 times as much pulp with at least 4 to 7 times less pollution. Hemp has thousands of industrial uses. In 1938, Popular Mechanics prepared an article labeled "New Billion-Dollar Crop," which stated, "Hemp is the standard of fiber of the world. It has great tensile strength and durability. It is used to produce more than 5,000 textile products ranging from rope to fine laces, and the woody herbs remaining after the fiber has been removed contains more than 77% cellulose, and can be used to produce more than 25,000 products, ranging from dynamite to cellophane." For more than 1,000 years before the time of Christ, until 1883 AD, cannabis hemp was a primary source of essential food oil and protein for humans and animals. In fact, the United States founded 8,327 hemp plantations, meaning a minimum of at least 2,000 acres, growing cannabis hemp for cloth, canvas, and even before it is used for baling cotton. In the early 1900s, Henry Ford and other working geniuses recognized that up to 90% of all fossil fuels used in the world today, including coal, oil, and natural gas, should long ago have been replaced with biomass such as cannabis. Biomass, which is biological material derived from living or recently living organisms, can be converted to methane, methanol, or gasoline at a fraction of the current cost of oil, coal, or nuclear energy, especially once environmental costs are factored in. With modern science providing all the medicinal benefits of marijuana, pharmaceutical companies have tried isolating different cannabinoids from cannabis in order to attempt to make their own drug that they can patent. They are also trying to take the high away, which is mainly done by ensuring there's no THC. Why is there a need to copy something that grows naturally on the planet Marijuana prohibition is an extremely new concept when compared to the thousands of years it's been in use. Not only that, but science has proven how beneficial marijuana is to the body. Pharmaceutical companies are trying to keep their profits by patenting their own version of cannabinoids in cannabis, since they know people will slowly stop using their drugs and begin taking cannabis. There's no need to alter something that grows naturally. When speaking about pharmaceutical companies attempting to isolate and replicate chemicals in cannabis, Dr. Paul Hornby, PhD, stated, "You can make a synthetic delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol in a test tube. It will have exactly the same number of atoms and the same arrangement. But how in the test tube can you put the electron spins together, the subatomic quirks, if you like, of that compound in the same way the biological enzyme system puts it together? It can't happen. Simply because it makes users feel good instead of potentially killing them, as current legal drugs do, it does not mean it should be illegal." The government has claimed for decades that marijuana is dangerous, and their claims have supposedly been backed by conclusive research. Although cannabis smoke contains some of the same carcinogens as tobacco smoke, there are also many cannabinoids which are found in cannabis smoke. Some of these, such as THC and cannabidiol, are not only non-carcinogenic, but they demonstrate anti-cancer properties in vivo and in vitro, meaning testing done on whole living organisms done through clinical trials and animal testing, or testing done in test tubes. Comparatively, nicotine promotes the development of cancer cells. Furthermore, cannabinoids stimulate other biological activities and responses that may mitigate the carcinogenic effects of smoke, such as downregulating the inflammatory arm of the immune system that is responsible for producing potentially carcinogenic free radicals, meaning unstable atoms that are believed to accelerate the progression of cancer. If the potential effects of smoking want to be avoided, there are two options: vaporizing cannabis or eating it. Vaporization limits respiratory toxins by heating cannabis to a temperature where cannabis vapor forms, but below the temperature needed for combustion, which is where smoke and associated toxins are produced. Cannabis can be eaten in a wide variety of forms by simply extracting the cannabinoids into oil or butter, which can then be used in cooking, thus producing no harm to the body. Cannabis prohibition began because of money-hungry men trying to protect their investments. So, Congress was presented with hearsay evidence, and although they were warned of it, they continued to make marijuana and hemp illegal. Cannabis, much like alcohol, should have never been made illegal to begin with. Although it did not take long for the government to fix their mistake of alcohol prohibition, it has taken much longer for them to fix their second prohibition mistake. The government overstepped its boundaries once again when it made marijuana illegal. It is time for the mistake to be fixed. For decades, marijuana users have been incarcerated over a substance much less harmful than alcohol, tobacco, and prescription drugs. Although non-cannabis smokers may not be concerned, cannabis legalization affects everyone. If it is legalized, not only would the government save money from not going after marijuana and marijuana smokers, it would be able to make money through taxation, as it does with alcohol and tobacco. More importantly, beyond saving money, cannabis has the potential to save lives. Dr. Jeffrey Hergenrather, addiction medicine specialist, explains, "People have a hard time believing that cannabis can have all these fantastic effects that are described. But what we're doing is we're just stimulating a natural system that's already there. This has been developing for hundreds of millions of years. The invertebrates, the sea squirts, the hydra, they are primitive endocannabinoid systems in those organisms. No other drug has so many beneficial effects on so many different diseases, especially without any harmful side effects. Cannabis's potential, both as medicine and through hemp, were known to the world prior to the 1930s and are still known to many today. It's time society started accepting and using this plant for what science and time have proven it to be, the most beneficial plant on earth." Thank you.
Cory, excellent work. I have a few questions. There's so much information that you covered, the background of the prohibition, the different uses. There's so much that was there. You mentioned the harmful effects of tobacco, alcohol, prescription drugs, and you said that those are all more harmful than cannabis. Now, by that logic of harm, do you think that it means that those things should be illegal, or that cannabis should be legalized?
No, definitely that those things should remain to be legal and that cannabis should be legalized.
Okay, so how do we know when something should be outlawed? or is there ever a case where a kind of prohibition should take place?
Well, in my opinion, this isn't actually part of the thesis, but I don't think the government has any constitutional right to make any drugs illegal, even coke, meth, whatever, all the stronger drugs, simply because they don't have a constitutional right to do it. If anything, it would be the state government that would have a right to make those things illegal. But as far as the federal government, they don't actually have a right to make anything illegal.
Okay, so how would you respond to someone that says that this is a matter of public safety then, because of the physical effects and the kinds of violence that come from drugs like cocaine, heroin, or whatever it may be?
I would just come back to the same argument that it doesn't matter the effects. It's simply that the government doesn't have a right to get involved with individuals' personal lives, as long as those lives aren't affecting other lives, such as drunk driving or violence. Obviously, those crimes should not be allowed. But
Okay, so the illegality would just come in whenever violence or the rights of another are being infringed upon.
Right.
Okay. Why would, you mentioned that if cannabis was legalized, I understood from the medical benefits, what you're arguing, that the prescription drug companies could stand to lose an enormous amount of money if cannabis was legalized. How you brought up that alcohol and tobacco companies could face similar profit loss. Why would that be?
I would argue that people, once they saw how not only not harmful but beneficial cannabis is, they would turn from alcohol and smoking cigarettes, since they are proven to kill and have such terrible effects on the human body. So I would say that people would eventually just turn to it as a safe alternative for their smoking habit or drinking habit.
Okay, so if they wanted to get high, rather than...
I mean, yeah, if they want to get drunk,
Oh,
instead
okay,
of getting
got it.
drunk, they would smoke cannabis,
Okay.
essentially.
This is going to seem like just a really, it's an odd question for me to even hear myself ask, but are there any other naturally occurring plants